G'day folks, and welcome to this first impressions video of Richard Berg's Pax Romana. We had an opportunity, a couple of friends and I had an opportunity yesterday to play this for the first time. It was our first experience with the game, and we played Scenario 8 Magna, Gracia, which covers a period from roughly 315 BC to 270 BC. And it focuses on the last remnants of those Greek colonies in southern Italy. So you have a Greek player, that was myself, a Roman player, and this is a period of sort of Roman expansion to the south, and the Carthaginians, who are also expanding into Sicily. They have a foothold in West Sicily, and they need to expand further into East Sicily. So for all of us, it was a bit of a learning experience. The scenario is sort of an extended one-turn scenario, so we didn't really have to worry about the economic side of things, the building of towns and cities and upkeep and all that type of stuff. It was really just focused on maneuver, combat, and so forth. When I say extended turn, it's almost equivalent to 2 full turns. You play through 3 activation markers, then you reseed the cup with 4 more, and you do a short manpower phase. So it's effectively 2 turns. As I said, learning experience for both of us. We both kind of grasped the rules pretty quickly. This is not an overly complicated game. It feels very similar to many other. It's not a card-driven game, but it has point-to-point movement and activation markers to activate a power. But it feels a lot like many card-driven games. Here I Stand, Wellington, Paths of Glory, in particular. Successes, of course. The obvious comparison can be made. Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, in particular. There are also some familiar combat elements, so there was nothing too foreign in the rules for Pax Romana. Point-to-point movement, you activate a force, you use the commanders for a major move, you use the commanders' strategic rating, you roll a die, and that's how many movement points they get, and they spend these points to move around the Mediterranean world. Combat is, well, having recently played Nations in Arms, it is a lot like Nations in Arms, or should I say Nations in Arms is a lot like this, in terms of both players roll a die each and apply some modifiers to work out how much damage they do to their opponent. We did not like the combat system. Basically what happens is that die roll gives you a percentage loss rate that you apply to your opponent. So if I, for example, roll a 5, my opponent loses 50% of their army. If my opponent rolls a 1, I only lose 10% of my army. That in itself is not so much a problem. The problem is it's so imbalanced. So if I have a force of 30 and I lose half my army, that's 15 combat units I'm losing. Whereas if my opponent has a force of 10, and he's losing 10%, he's only losing 1 combat unit. So there's this huge disparity in losses that frustrated us. Now that's sort of, it's not as direct as that. You basically apply modifiers for odds ratios, for cavalry superiority or supremacy, for leader tactical rating differences, and a few others. And these give you column shifts. One player will have a number of column shifts. Typically it was in the realm of sort of 2 to 4 column shifts. What this means then is that if I roll a 1 and you roll a 5, I can apply, let's say, 4 column shifts or shifts to these dice rolls. So I can bring your 5 down to a 3. So it's 2 shifts down, and I can bring my 1 up to a 3. That's 4 shifts in total. So we're each doing, in effect, 30% damage to our opponent's forces. Even then, if I have a force of 30, 30% of that is still 9 units. And if you have a force of 10, 30% of that is going to be 3, or rounding up, 4 units. So there's still this big disparity. When we're rolling the same amount, the bigger army is typically taking heavier losses. In this scenario that we played, one of my friends, an ancient historian and classicist, played the Romans, and the Romans are in a situation where they need to attack the Greeks in the south, but they've also got these tribes banging on their door to the north, and there's this big barbarian army coming out by this event ship. They can reduce the size of this barbarian army by attacking these northern tribes. So he sent his legions up to attack these tribes, and they're fairly weak tribes with a strength of 4, a battle point strength of 4. He had about 8, maybe 12 battle points with the legions, rolled poorly and lost heavily. He lost, in fact, the first combat, had to return to attack the tribe again, eventually eliminated it, but there are 5 tribes up there, which meant that this big barbarian army came out and were constantly a thorn in the side of the Romans. Now, I played the Greeks, and I was pretty happy with this. I felt bad for him because he was rolling very poorly and losing a lot of his forces. You typically round up battle casualties. I won't go into detail on that. With the Carthaginians to the south, they also tended to roll poorly in combat right when they needed it. So, yeah, even as the Greeks, and I ended up winning the scenario, I achieved my victory conditions, but I just see these Romans rolling these dice and getting frustrated, and I was frustrated for the Roman player. This is a game where we felt that everything else is great. We love the setting. The point-to-point movement works really well, but the combat mechanisms were really lacking. It's kind of a game that is just begging for just a modification to provide a new combat mechanism. Yes, ancient warfare was chaotic and there could be huge swings, and that's reflected in other ancient warfare games, Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. And I should say we've played quite a lot of ancient warfare games, Rome versus Carthage, Time of Crisis recently, Successors. I've played SPQR quite a lot. It's a tactical battle game. Republic of Rome, of course, many others. I love there's a really nice. There's a lot of rules in this game, I should say. The rulebook in my edition is 40 pages long, but that gameplay is a lot simpler than that suggests. Chit activation, you draw a chit, you activate your forces, you get to move 1 army with a major move plus 2 minor moves, and you just move around the map, paying movement points as you go. You roll to determine how many movement points you have, you add your command rating, strategy rating, you fight battles. Battles are pretty easy to work out. Yeah, we did find the one, battles were frustrating. The one rule section that we couldn't quite work out was the interception rules. So when you intercept an enemy force, much like Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, you roll 2 dice, you apply some modifiers, and you need to get 12 or more. So it's a little bit different to the implementation in Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage. But if you succeed, you, as the inactive player, you become the attacker in that combat. Now, at the end of a round of combat, typically the attacker has to regroup. Now, we kind of had a discussion on how to resolve this. We couldn't quite figure out, does the interceptor then regroup to the space they return from? This is made all the more difficult by the kind of siege rules. It's not quite a siege sequence, but towns and cities contribute their strength as battle points towards combat. And you can intercept an enemy force moving into your town or city. And then you make a decision to whether to fight inside the city, and there are 2 separate battles in that case, or to come outside the walls and combine your forces into one big battle. And there's all these kind of options, and there's a lot that isn't clear. Certainly in the first edition, even the second edition rules, which we were consulting because it's been revised basically, we couldn't quite figure out how that interception into a town space works. As it turned out, this is the very first thing that happened. The Carthaginians tried to attack out of Lilybaeum, I think, towards Syracuse in the south of Italy, south of Sicily, and we couldn't quite figure out how to resolve this interception and regroup and retreat and so forth. That was the only real rules uncertainty we had. Everything else went pretty smooth. It was a fairly quick playing scenario, a fast playing game. We got the hang of it pretty quickly. As I said, that combat just really, really irked all three of us in this scenario. Even, I mean, I barely lost the combat. I certainly didn't lose a major combat. The worst that happened was right towards the end. The Romans threw everything at Tarentum, and I lost 10 battle points in one combat because I had a big force of about 30 troops defending. There's no stacking limits in the game, so I just kind of was bulking up my my cities. So yeah, we kind of love the theme, love the idea of this sort of grand strategic game focusing on the ancient world, all sort of undercut by this frustration with the combat sequence. And there are optional rules, I should say, and we didn't apply these, but we looked at the rules afterwards and thought maybe it would be worth. There's an optional kind of re-roll rule where you can re-roll your battle roll if you're really not happy with it. And I would suggest that as an essential rule if you're going to play that. I would also maybe some other rules for reducing casualties for large armies. Yeah, we just found some of the results in terms of casualties rather absurd. In terms of these large armies losing to a smaller army and then losing huge percentages of their forces based on these quick little die rolls. Maybe perhaps a tactics section, how Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage has the battle cards, and that battle sequence would be great. I think I suggested it'd be nice to see that battle sequence implemented in this game. The other problem we had was that the map, it's a one map game, and it was far too small for the pieces. The scenario we played just focused on southern Italy, and you've got these massive stacks of forces being knocked over quite a lot. The counters are double-sided, but there are different. Some of the legions have a reduced side, which is fine, but let me show you one example. You have 30 heavy infantry, Roman heavy infantry on one side. If you accidentally flip this over, it becomes 30 Greek heavy infantry. And it's the same. I'll show you a legion. Oh, well, here you go. This is 2 legions with 4 battle points. If you accidentally flip that over, there's a garrison on the other side. So you've really got to be careful not to flip your counters over, not to bump them. The map is really small, so there's a lot of congestion of forces. As I said, we did knock over a couple of stacks quite a few times. So this game is really begging for a deluxe edition that expands the map across 2 24 by 32 inch pieces of paper, a revised edition, deluxe edition that enhances the battle sequence. This has Richard Berg's footprint all over it, in terms of lots and lots of charts and tables for various things. We of course didn't play a scenario that required the Baghdad booty call table, but that's in there. A lot of this is pretty straightforward. So the tables are just things that summarize movement points, interception modifiers. They're easy to remember. Battle point loss distribution, fairly straightforward. Battle die roll shifts summary. We had this figured out within a matter of minutes. We were memorizing most of this. Consulted it for the first battle or two, but then we'll fine. Didn't use the invasion table. Leader to death table is fairly straightforward. If you roll a 12, they're dead. If you're the loser, a 2 or a 12, and they're dead. That happened. I think it was the very first battle. The Carthaginians lost their leader on the first, maybe the second battle. And they were devastated. What else? Fleet continuity and naval disasters. That's an interesting rule. The Carthaginians also tried to gamble and tried to invade Sicily again via a deep sea space and lost some of their fleet with some troops along the way. So a lot of chaos and randomness in this Richard Berg game. So the Roman player was very frustrated by their poor combat rolls, by these tribes, by these barbarians, by the losses in their legions that they were suffering. Because in this scenario, they can't build light troops. The Carthaginians struggled with combat rolls as well. And I as the Greeks, had a lot of luck and not much of a strategy. I just sort of bunkered down, and the Greeks are kind of in this scenario. They're in the center of the Romans and the Carthaginians, as they were historically. This is what happened. And I waited for their attacks to come. The Carthaginians attacked me. I won that combat, and then just gradually harassed the Carthaginians until I could attack, I think it's Lilybaeum out on the west coast of Sicily, to achieve my scenario objectives. Yeah, so that is that was my first impression based on that one shortish scenario of Pax Romana. I want to recommend it because I found it fun, but with the caveat that maybe consider house rule in combat, or maybe consider that optional rule. I'd love to hear if you've played this and you have some other suggestions for combat. Are we overreacting? I mean, we were all frustrated, and even I, the recipient of that good luck, was frustrated and could feel the pain of that Roman player rolling so badly in combat. Maybe it all balances out in the long term. It certainly didn't in the scenario where they lost heavily with their legions. So yeah, keen to hear what other people have to say about Pax Romana. It is a classic. It is one of Richard Berg's top-rated games. If you go to Board Game Geek and sort of rate his games from sort of highest rated, and I know the ratings are subjective, to lowest, it's about fourth. And as I said, I've had my art for a long time. Would love to see a deluxe version of this. I think it could really hit a sweet spot for gaming the ancient world. Again, that's Pax Romana.